back to California, and we cast another actor to play Father Karras. We actually had a deal with another rather well-known actor at that time, even though I wanted an unknown actor for that role, because I didn't want people to see an actor who they were familiar with wearing a priest collar. We cast this other actor, and one day I got a call from Jason Miller. I was in California, he was in New York. About a week or so after our meeting. And he said, you know, I've read that book now. I read The Exorcist. I hadn't read it when we talked. And he said, I think it's really great. And he said, and I am this guy. I'm telling you, I am this character. I said, well, Jason, you know, I appreciate that, but we've cast someone else. And he said, no, you got to screen test me. He said, would you give me a screen test? I said, what's the point of that? We have another actor cast. He said, no, you've got to do this. Anyway, his play had become quite successful and received a wonderful criticism. And out of respect for him, I said, okay, you get out here in the next 2 days and I'll do a screen test with you. He said, I can't get there in 2 days. He said, I don't fly. He said, you don't fly? I said, how are you going to get here? He said, well, I'll take a train. I said, that'll take you 4 days. He said, I know, but you got to wait for me. And I waited for him. I arranged a screen test, again involving Ellen Burstyn, who again interviewed Jason the way she did Linda. And we improvised that scene. And then I shot a tight close-up of Jason, just saying the Mass in a tight close-up, the way he says it in the film, in a very deeply felt way, where he was discovering the meaning of the words for the first time, was the direction that I had given him. I didn't know whether it was going to come off or not until the next day when I saw the rushes, and it was amazing. The camera loved this guy. He had a voice quality and a look that was perfect for Father Karras. And of course, I knew that he had basically the same spiritual conflict. So I then took the bold step of paying off the other actor. I got Warner Brothers, who now had Ellen Burstyn that they didn't want in the lead, to now pay off another actor who they did want to go ahead and put this untried young playwright who had never appeared in a motion picture or had any leading role anywhere to give him the lead as Father Karras in the movie. Again, it was the movie god that sent us Jason Miller, because to this day I can't imagine any other actor doing this role as well as he did.
You know who I think really did it?
Who?
The Dominicans. Go pick on them.
I could have you deported, you know that? I lied. You look like Sal Mineo.
When I started to think about the music for The Exorcist, I felt I did not want anything that was going to be predictable, like a church organ, or like liturgical music in any way. Neither did I want highly dramatic music that generally in a film either overwhelms a sequence or tells the audience what the sequence is about and how they should feel about it. I wanted the music to work in the film more or less like a cold hand on the back of someone's neck. In other words, tones and textures, and just a little feeling to help instill the irrational fear that had to run through the entire film. So I chose excerpts of a number of pieces of contemporary classical music by composers like George Crumb and Hans Werner Henze and Krzysztof Penderecki, and blended them together in kind of an original score that is, for the most part, completely understated. Jack Nietzsche came in after the fact to try and do some linking sounds that I wasn't able to locate on the recordings of these classical composers. So Jack came in and did some simple little things like rubbing crystal glass and creating simple sound textures that sort of augmented the other excerpts that I used in the film. He did these little excerpts so seamlessly that it's hard not to believe that that score wasn't written for the film. But the score is made up of a lot of found objects linked together by Nietzsche's kind of incidental music. And Nietzsche did not use any traditional instruments. He created musical tones and textures by rubbing glass.
Belief in the power of exorcism can make it disappear.
I wanted a little motif that was both melodic and would serve as a kind of almost nursery rhyme. Brahms' Lullaby was what came to mind, and at one time I was going to use Brahms' Lullaby. Beyond that, I couldn't verbalize what I was looking for. But I told Larry Marks, again, the music director of Warner's, what I was looking for, and he said, look, I don't know where you're going to find anything like that, but why don't you go into my office? There's a whole bunch of records in there. He said, go in there and just listen to a bunch of stuff and see if there's anything you like. One of the demos I picked up was Tubular Bells. It's by a guy named Mike Oldfield. I put on Tubular Bells, and there was exactly what I was looking for. To this day, I have never met nor spoken to Mike Oldfield or anyone connected with the recording, but I found it on this pile of demos in Larry Mark's office. That was exactly what I wanted, and I gave it to Larry, and I said, let's get this. Of course, the original recording of Tubular Bells is much longer, and it goes into a narration. It goes into Mike Oldfield talking about and describing the effects of different tubular bells. So I just used the melodic excerpt that I wanted, that's right at the beginning of the record, and cut out of it at the place where Oldfield starts talking. And that's what you hear in the film. Richard Branson, who owns Virgin Records, wrote his autobiography recently and talks about how it was that piece of music that put them on the map. It was their first million seller.
Carl, did you put
I really don't know who put the crucifix under Reagan's pillow. The implication is that it was Carl. Probably it was Carl, or his wife, who is sort of on the brink of religious fanaticism, shall we say? Superstition. I think in the book, Blatty specifies that indeed it was Carl, but I saw no real need to go deeper into the question here. In Blatty's novel, it is something of a detective mystery, not simply Kinderman's trying to find out what's going on with Reagan McNeil, but Chris's attempt to learn about some of these strange details that are going on in her house.
What man?
Might your daughter remember, perhaps, if Mr. Dennings was in her room that night?
Lee J. Cobb was a consummate pro, a great actor, distinguished actor. He had created the role of Willie Loman on Broadway in Death of a Salesman. He played Johnny Friendly in one of the greatest American films ever made called On the Waterfront. And in general, he had put up a gallery of tremendous performances. And Lee himself was a truly sensational actor. As I said earlier, I wanted a combination of unknowns mixed together with seasoned professionals, and there was no more seasoned professional than Lee J. Cobb. As good as he was at bombast, his role here in The Exorcist is one of the most understated and beautifully orchestrated that I've ever seen in a film.
Speaking plainly, Mrs. McNeil, it isn't likely he would fall from a window. Besides, a fall wouldn't do to his neck what
this particular scene is my favorite scene in the film.
My hunch.
I can watch it over and over again. It's done so delicately and so subtly. The camera technique is very unobtrusive. The camera keeps moving into both Kinderman and Chris at a very slow pace, sort of trying to get closer and closer to what both of them have in mind. And then at a certain point, once Kinderman has kind of let all of his cards show, and we, the audience, are aware of where he's heading with this discussion, the camera starts to pull away from the two of them slowly. So they're matching shots that move in at the same time and pull back at the same time. And so, while I think it works very well technically, in a very simple way, I think it's also just brilliantly performed by these two actors. This is a scene that you could show to a class of acting students. You're dealing with two of the very best actors of the world at that time.
Would you like to ask him?
And as I say, I really love this scene. I can watch it over and over again because I think it's so brilliantly performed. And I also think it's brilliantly written. I think it's the best writing that Blatty has in his excellent screenplay.
Would you like some more coffee?
Please.
I don't think there was any point in going any further with either the medical examination or in the detective's examination of what might actually be happening. It's all clearly suggested here, and the rest is left to the audience. Presumably, when Kinderman leaves this house, he goes back and reflects on what he's learned, and perhaps he analyzes what he thinks is evidence found at the scene of the crime. But I didn't feel like any of that was necessary.
Your daughter, she's the artist?
After you understand that, as I think you do here, that yes, he suspects that Regan McNeil is a suspect in this murder.
You might ask your
But what are you going to do with that? How far can you go with that? Theoretically and technically,
He wouldn't have any reason.
could Regan herself be prosecuted for Denning's murder? It was Regan who, in fact, murdered Dennings, but under the influence of a demonic possession. Now, I don't know of any actual instance where a person who was possessed by a demon and committed some outrageous acts ever put that up as a defense. I think they'd probably be laughed out of a courtroom if they did.
Please give an autograph.
Of course. Where's a pencil?
Right here. Here. Oh,
I think Columbo is probably ripped off from this character, because this character came first. Kinderman came before Columbo. And I think Peter Falk, I'm not saying he stole anything, but his characterization owes a lot to Lee J. Cobb's performance as Kinderman. But Cobb created this guy out of whole cloth from what he had read in Blatty's fiction. I mean, it was Blatty who actually created Kinderman, but Cobb who brought him to life. And he is easily one of the greatest American actors, so it's an honor to have worked with him and to have had him in this picture.
I'll come back when she's feeling better.
Here again, you have one of those extremely slow and quiet moments that precede what is to come, which is very fast and noisy and disturbing. This is orchestrated, this sequence and the next, very much like a Shostakovich symphony, where extremely quiet passages precede noisy and bombastic ones. Perhaps the image of the little girl masturbating with the crucifix is one of the most shocking in film history, I would say, as you bring together in one frame two extremely disparate elements that are never seen together in anyone's conscious mind, and that's the crucifix and the vagina. And yes, it is a kind of a blasphemous image, but we decided early on to retain it because this is what it means to be demonically possessed. There's the crucifix that represents something, and there's the vagina that represents something else. They are at opposite ends of the mode of consciousness that people have. And it also brings together, in a much deeper sense, the sexuality that is behind much of Catholic mythology. The next few minutes of this picture truly represent, I think, screen acting at its very best and Burstyn at her very best. There's no doubt in your mind while you're watching it that you are watching an anguished mother who has no idea what's happening with her daughter. The scene is beautifully written. It's very delicate. It turns out to be very emotional. Again, it's another highlight for me, the way these two actors play this scene and the simple manner in which we photographed it and let it speak for itself.